Last thing you came to do was listen to a lawyer for 15 minutes. So A, I'll keep it briefer than that. And B, before I start, I do want to say thank you to Amy. With respect to Lake Region individuals, she is the straw that stirs the drink. So a round of applause for Amy.
Thank you.
When she asked me to make a few remarks today, I said, well, now what am I going to say? Everybody's reading Heather Cox Richardson, Robert Hubble, Robert Wright. They're all writing great stuff. So, but in the spirit of good trouble, I said, okay, I'm going to identify 3 things that I think are good trouble that are going on now with respect to the judicial system. 3 things that I think are bad trouble, really bad trouble, and 3 suggestions that I have for future good trouble. And I'll spend a few minutes on each of those 3 examples with respect to each of those. So trial lawyers, as you may or may not know, operate by the rule of 3. Make 3 points and shut up. Okay, so 3 points on each. First, good trouble that we have seen. Trump's been in office less than 6 months. Over 400 lawsuits have been filed against him, against the executive. Judges do not have a roving commission to do good and to stop bad. They have to respond to lawsuits. Those 400 plus lawsuits were filed by the work of thousands, indeed many thousands of lawyers across the country. And the lawyers are doing this despite Trump's effort to shut them down. 4 of the firms that he sent letters to, as you all know, saying, you got to stop, you're going to be punished for having taken actions which Donald Trump, regard as adverse to me. All 4 of those law firms who fought that have gotten orders overturning that executive order. And other lawyers and law firms know that they're in the crosshairs, but they're taking on these cases anyway. So first sign of good trouble is the legal profession, frankly, which gets a bad name, oftentimes deserved, but I think they're doing a great job, and that's why I have my ACLU hat, which says, see you in court, across the front. The responses of the lawyers, even yesterday, the ACLU filed a case in Florida challenging Alligator Alcatraz, which only now some media are starting to refer to as what it really is, a concentration camp. And the ACLU is seeking to make sure that people are identified, that they have access to lawyers and so forth. All this stuff would not be happening, as I say, without lawyers who cared. Second, good trouble, judges. Not 100%, but an unbelievable, to me, an encouraging number of judges have not only reacted to this administration and its policies by issuing injunctions and orders, but by taking the administration to task. And I used to oppose the media saying Judge X was appointed by this president or Judge Y by that president. They're all federal judges. They have lifetime appointments. But increasingly, since this administration tries to make the judiciary just as if they were advocates for one side or the other, I think it's appropriate now for the court, for the media to identify when a Republican-appointed judge makes remarks about this administration. And just looking at some Republican-appointed judges and what they've said. Federal officials are flaunting the laws they were sworn to uphold. Quote, as is becoming far too common, we're constrained again by the efforts of the executive branch to set aside the rule of law and in pursuit of its goals. Quote, the order raises constitutional eyebrows on many levels. Quote, This is blatantly unconstitutional. So I say, good trouble, kudos to these judges, and wouldn't it be nice if Republicans in Congress had half that courage? Third and final, and the list could go on, but third and final is to Justices Ketanji Brown and Sotomayor and Kagan. They are now becoming more and more explicit in calling out the Republican-appointed Supreme Court judges who, frankly, and without explanation many times, are simply doing Trump's bidding. And I'll come back to that on one of my bad trouble identifications. But kudos to them. Again, judges at all levels are facing threats. Their families are being threatened. They're being doxxed. And yet they're standing up for the rule of law. So all those things give me some level of optimism. 3 examples of bad trouble, which tend to have a negative effect on my optimism. Department of Justice lawyers. I talked about the good trouble lawyers bringing the good cases. Department of Justice lawyers are making frivolous arguments. They're not being candid with the courts. They are, in fact, now by the Attorney General being fired when they are candid with the courts. That's what happened with the Department of Justice lawyer in the case with the fellow deported to El Salvador. And it used to be, having been a trial lawyer for many decades, it used to be when you go into court and it's the Department of Justice lawyers on the other side, the courts gave them great deference. They were trained, they were ethical, and now the opposite is becoming true. There is a lack of credibility. It is hurting the system, and thank goodness some of the judges recognize it. But it's a terrible system when those appointed to uphold the law in the Department of Justice are doing just the opposite. Second bad trouble, which everybody's read about, the shadow docket. The shadow docket, in short, and you know, when I went to law school back in the Neanderthal days and we wrote on parchment paper, the Supreme Court was the essence of a deliberative process. Briefs filed by both sides, intense argument, deliberation by the justices, draft opinions being shared amongst the justices until they came up with things that they felt were worth publishing. The shadow docket dispenses with all of that. Taking cases on an emergency basis with no explanation and issuing decisions with no explanation. The most recent one, obviously, the Department of Justice dismantling, upholding without any explanation as to why the decision to dismantle the Department of Justice, a 19-page dissent joined in by the 3 women justices, liberal women justices. But this shadow docket is dangerous, and it allows the court to simply ignore its deliberative role. The third and somewhat related issue, we all complain, appropriately so, about the shadow docket and some of the substantive decisions. We somehow have lost sight of the corruption. I mean, do you ever see the articles repeating the Harlan Crow payments on behalf of and for Clarence Thomas? Or Justice Alito? And you know, Clarence Thomas doesn't care. He doesn't defend himself. Nobody can do anything. So he just ignores it. Justice Alito gets this wonderful hunting trip. Free flight on a private plane. He's called on it. He says, well, if I hadn't gone on that private plane, the seat would have been empty. So it wasn't really valuable. Okay, guys, go to the Portland airport tomorrow. You want to go to Hawaii? Check out who has available seats and go up to the counter and say, I want that seat and I don't want to pay for it because otherwise it's going to go empty. I mean, it's laughable, and yet he does it. Just like it's laughable when the upside-down flag was flying in front of his house, he said, oh, I didn't know anything about it, it was my wife. Anyway, the corruption of the Supreme Court is of serious concern. I said I'd have 3 ideas for good trouble going forward. So it's difficult for a judge to hold the executive in contempt of court. Appropriate, but difficult, and difficult on a number of fronts. You can't really envision the marshals going and arresting Marco Rubio and taking him to jail. And if they did, he'd become the martyr and everything. But what courts can do is much more to discipline the lawyers from the Department of Justice who are making these frivolous arguments. There's a rule in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure called Rule 11. Lawyers can be sanctioned for making frivolous arguments. Lawyers can be sanctioned for misrepresenting things. I've been in court sometimes, and the court says, well, what's your client think about so-and-so? And I said, Your Honor, I don't know. And the judge will look at me and they say, well, Mr. Goldberg, go out, get on the telephone, call your client, and report back to me in 5 minutes. Okay, I do that. And I make sure I can get a hold of my client. Well, I'm sorry, when the Department of Justice lawyers show up and they're asked, well, what's the plan with respect to Mr. Abrego Garcia? And they say, well, I don't know. I haven't been told by my client. Go out in the hallway and find the answer. Judges have more power over the lawyers and to discipline the lawyers, and where appropriate, to report them to bar authority. So that's one good trouble going forward that I think should be exercised. Second good trouble, Senate confirmation hearing for judges. And frankly, for cabinet officials, but I'll focus on judges. Imagine Susan Collins being shocked that Brett Kavanaugh voted to overturn Roe versus Wade after he said he wouldn't. Well, I have a suggestion for senators when they hold these hearings. Candidate for this office, is it your view, just historically giving you an example, is it your view that Roe versus Wade is settled all? Yes, it is. Okay, Mr. Candidate, I have a document here for you to sign. It's a resignation from your position as Justice of the Supreme Court, which I will hold in escrow as long as you live up to your representations that you've made to the Senate. That's the only way you're going to hold people responsible. And as I say, they can do the same thing with respect to cabinet candidates as well. Third good trouble suggestion moving forward, and it deals with the justices who have shown corruption, have shown bias. Start to file motions to recuse these judges in a case that's before them. Nobody's been doing that. And there's a great reluctance. It's the old story, don't fire at the king unless you're going to hit him. Okay? But you're not going to get the vote of Alito. You're not going to get the vote of Clarence Thomas. Anyway, so if you file a motion to recuse so they can't participate, you may not win that motion, but it starts to focus attention on the biases that are held by certain of these justices. So those are my 3 suggestions for good trouble going forward. And I'll conclude with this. These protest marches, and although I live in Boston, I've had a place up here in Bridgton for 50 years. And we've been up here. We were up here for the Hands Off rally. Great. We were up here for the No Kings rally. Fabulous. We're up here for this rally. These things matter. And they matter not because we're going to change Trump's mind. That assumes he has a mind. It's not going to change his mind. But you know, what I was saying at the outset about good trouble, about the lawyers who are devoting themselves at risk to themselves and their professional careers, the judges who are standing up for the rule of law, the individuals who are being willing to challenge this administration, these protests matter. They reflect support around the country for that kind of conduct. So congratulations to Bridgton and to Lake Region Individual for putting these things together. Thank you.
write all that out?